Welcome to Accelerated. I'm your host, Vitaly, Golomb, partner and mobility and sustainability global practice lead at award-winning tech investment bank Drakestar. On this season of the podcast, we're hearing from some of the global leaders in everything electric and autonomous, moving us quickly into the future. On this episode, we cover a different kind of an autonomous vehicle as I speak with William Santana Li, chairman and CEO of Knightscope. Knighscope makes indoor and outdoor autonomous security robots that have been preventing crimes in the real world for over 6 years. The company just went public on NASDAQ through a Regulation A listing. Before founding Knightscope, William founded a series of mobility companies raising over $300 million in venture capital. He began his career at Ford, where in a decade he climbed from an internship in electronics to becoming a director on the M&A team. We spoke about being an unemployable entrepreneur, his thoughts on where we are with autonomy and why baby steps are the way to go, his mission to make US a safer country, crowdfunding, the future of robotics, and much more. Bill, thank you very much for being with us today on Accelerated. I'm excited to get an update on the company. As I mentioned before we hit record, I remember seeing it when I was a corporate VC some years back, and it's pretty exciting, the vision that you had then and where you are with the company today. So would love to dig into a few different questions, and I always love to start at the beginning. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what you were like as a kid.
I was born in New York City. My first interaction with quote-unquote crime was when I was 5 years old. We got robbed, and my dad said, "That's enough of that." And so we moved to what some might consider a suburb of New York City, which would be Stamford, Connecticut, where I grew up. I was the long-haired kid in a heavy metal band. At night, playing guitar, and then during the day was in the honors classes and studying a lot. And I didn't come from a wealthy family, so I tried as much through Berkeley, Yale, and Carnegie Mellon to try to take as many summer classes as possible. So I was able to graduate a year early, actually. It was bloody painful, but then I cut my hair and off to Corporateville at Ford Motor Company.
So funny story. I'm a very similar background. I grew up playing in bands. I was a drummer, through junior high, high school, and played in every single nightclub. It feels like by the time 15 here in Bay Area. So very similar. But you went on to quite an academic career to start things off. Tell us a little bit about what you studied.
So when I was out here in Berkeley, I think it was after my sophomore year in high school. It was funny because I had the really long hair. I'm 16 years old. I'm sitting in the back of the general astronomy class at Berkeley with like actual real college students. So that was fun. I studied a little bit of calculus and math at Yale, and then at Carnegie got a bachelor's in electrical engineering with a minor in mechanical, and then subsequently went on to Ford Motor Company in Detroit and did the also difficult night classes and got my MBA from University of Detroit while still working like a maniac at Ford.
Yeah, so you spent like a decade at Ford, and it was interesting that you started as an intern, and then it seems like every year or year and a half you changed jobs and got all the way up to...
obviously unemployable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at my LinkedIn profile during that period, it's like this kid can't keep a job. And I all kidding aside, I was grateful for the opportunity. I learned so much in 10 years. I got to see literally almost every facet of the company, from component systems and vehicle engineering to manufacturing rationalization to coming up with affordable business structures and finance stuff, mergers and acquisitions. Worked on 4 different continents. It was a wonderful, wonderful training ground.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You got into M&A, and it seems from that you learned a lot. And when you left Ford, you spent the following 15 years. And I guess like many entrepreneurs or all entrepreneurs, you became unemployable. And you never worked for anybody else again. So you spent the following 15 years building your own 4 different companies, and you raised a lot of capital. Tell us a little bit about Greenleaf, Model E, Built to Order, and Carbon Motors.
I think Greenleaf was ill-advised. I was an intrapreneur, so I convinced the board of Ford Motor Company to release $250 million to me to do a roll-up in the used parts industry. And for your listeners that might not know what a roll-up is basically buy a bunch of small companies that look similar in nature, and you end up with one big one. So for those old school folks, back in the day, maybe AutoNation, Waste Management, Blockbuster kind of all grew up through a roll-up. So I was able to buy, 22 companies in 11 months. There's a little bit of a madness going on, and built the second largest automotive recycler, which is still operating today under the ticker LKQ. And then went on, after you do that, I had my own board, I had my own HR, my own treasury. It kind of gives you a little bit of that entrepreneurial bug. And I got recruited by SoftBank Venture Capital to come out here to Silicon Valley and see if we can do some interesting stuff in the automotive space. I massive credit to Elon Musk for getting Tesla, really off the ground. It's very difficult. The auto space has a lot of bad habits, and it's also capital intensive. But basically started working on the passion, which was, after 9/11. I had a former, at the time, active law enforcement officer call for help, and wanting to see if we can build a new kind of specialty law enforcement vehicle. And I've been working with him ever since to try to see if we can better secure the country. And we can go into that if you like, but that's kind of the short version.
No, that's great. Thanks for the quick overview of that. I mean, it's always interesting to see how people get to where they are, and kind of this how do you become an entrepreneur, and then how do you become this overnight success 20, 30 years in the making? So yeah, it's interesting. So this brings us actually to Knightscope now in 2013. Tell us about what inspired you to start the company.
It was a combination of me being still really pissed off about 9/11. I think, it's Sandy Hook and the Boston Marathon bombings is like enough. We need to, as a country, fix this problem. The first role of government is what? To protect its citizens. The country's over 200 years old. We're on our 46th president. And somehow we have a $2 trillion negative economic impact of crime and terrorism on the U.S. every single year. And we kind of think that's okay. And I don't think that's okay. I think the founders of our country would be horrified to see that, literally going to work, school, the movie theater, or the mall, like you have a risk of being shot or killed in our society. I don't think that's appropriate nor acceptable. Everyone in this country has a right to live in a safe country. And I love the U.S. I love my country, but it's structurally flawed in one very important regard, and it's how we handle law enforcement, homeland security, and the like on our own soil. We're really good outside of our borders. The military has a wonderful process to actually drive innovation. It's a little costly and takes a lot of time, but there's actually risk capital, and we give a soldier anything he or she might need in a theater of war. We don't do that for the officers and guards on our own soil, and that's what we're trying to fix.
No, it's interesting. It probably has something to do with the fact that all the police departments or all different agencies are kind of different, and they're all making decisions on their own, instead of having kind of one centralized approach to everything. But that's probably a different podcast. So if we stick to kind of the mobility aspect, the autonomy aspect, and the really interesting technology there, tell us a little bit about the actual product, the robots that Knighscope makes.
Yeah, so we build autonomous security robots known as ASRs. And it's a unique combination of self-driving autonomous technology, so similar to a self-driving car, robotics, AI, and electric vehicles, in an effort to do basically two things at the same time. One less maybe obvious than the other. The first one, if you don't spend a lot of time in physical security, is just physically being there stops a lot of negative behavior. So providing that physical deterrence, a lot of people wonder why the machine's so big. Our most popular one's 5 foot tall, 400 pounds, primarily patrolling outdoors, and it's to provide that physical deterrence. No different than you driving down the highway and you see a patrol vehicle on the side of the road. It almost doesn't matter what speed you're doing. You're going to pump those brakes almost as a reflex. Kind of same effect. And then the second is, how can we give the 2 million officers and guards smart eyes and ears and their voice on the ground at eye level in multiple locations at the same time? So literally build some tools for them to be able to do their jobs much, much more effectively.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're touching on a couple of things like the broken glass theory, right, and economics, and the presence. I think it was actually pioneered by New York, if I remember correctly, New York City, where they would strategically put patrol cars, just park patrol cars around the city, and to create a deterrent. So it's quite interesting. Now, the technology part of it is really fascinating, and you've had to have these very simple robots that do seemingly simple things and patrol. There's a lot of really interesting technology. Talk a little bit about the components, what you had to develop, how you're able to get all the different things together to build these robots.
Yeah, not so simple. It's basically a self-driving car at low speed. So you got to operate 24/7 in the rain, at night. We've been through now 6 winters and 6 summers, probably nearing 1,000,004 hours out in the field. And while you have a client down your throat, like this is not an R&D project or some science fair project. Like we actually have clients utilizing the technology. So 2/3 to 3/4 of what's in the machine is proprietary to us. So we design everything. We engineer it. Pre-COVID, I used to get really ticked off. People would come over to Knightscope headquarters like, yeah, so who designed all this stuff? Like, we did. Who engineered all the software, mechanical, electrical, firmware? We did. Where in China did you get these built? And I just want to I go through the roof. I'm like, okay, come over here and let me show you. And so we physically build the machines ourselves here in Silicon Valley, and then we deploy and support them. We hold contracts from Hawaii through Texas to Rhode Island, operating 24/7. So, you've got a combination of LiDAR, sonar, accelerometers, wheel encoders, and a bunch of crazy software to be able to patrol indoors and outdoors, primarily outdoors, in dynamic environments. And that could be where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of cars, or none at all, or you're going up and down a 9-story parking structure. You got to be able to basically be in a lot of areas, and it's completely hands off. There's nobody in there. For as many people on the internet think there's people in the robot, and it's hands off. I guess the automotive equivalent of level 5. There's no one kind of remote controlling them.
So you mean it's not a guy in a robot costume like Elon had going on that?
No, we've been accused, but no.
So tell us a little about how does it integrate with current law enforcement, like in the public space versus the kind of private campuses. How does this work together with the human element?
So everyone kind of focuses on the shiny object, which is the robots, but the magic's kind of behind the scenes. The machines generate over 90 terabytes of data a year that no human could ever possibly process. So we put that in a digestible format, which we call the KSOC, or just a browser-based user interface that allows the officer, the guard, or 911 dispatch, or the security operations center to interact with the machines remotely. So they can get live streaming feeds of all the data. You've got 360-degree high definition live streaming or recorded video. You can speak through the machines as if it's a mobile PA system. You can automate broadcasts by time, by location, randomly or manually issue them. And then you can do some forensics and investigation. So again, it's basically eyes, ears, and voice on the ground. And
talk about a little bit about the economics. How does this work? So let's say give us some customers that you already have, and how does it work, and how do they calculate the kind of the ROI in this case?
Where we do really well, the ROI is one of two things or both. Either you have some criminal activity happening and you haven't been able to kind of fix the problem, or you have a budget issue, meaning you don't have enough resources to address the crime issue, or both. And so our clients can be, Bank of Hawaii, Citizens Bank, a Samsung, major corporations. It could be a law enforcement agency. numerous hospitals, casinos, manufacturing plants, logistics facilities. Basically anywhere indoors or outdoors you might see a guard or an officer patrolling is an opportunity for us, including airports and rail and the like. And we offer the technology on a machine as a service business model. So I like to say it's luxury automotive per unit economics, but the margins look more like a software as a service company. So we sign year-long contracts running 24/7, and the machines basically recover the cost of the machine in the first calendar year. Then the second, third, fourth, fifth year, you're basically printing money except for the maintenance and service and kind of operating expenditures. So a little bit of a different approach than in Detroit, where at the time we could barely cover our cost of capital.
Yeah, so it sounds like they basically, Steve Blank had this really interesting article that I've pointed a lot of entrepreneurs to years ago, where he's talking about, if you're trying to launch a business and you're saying, hey, we're going to reinvent the wheel here, that's a lot more difficult for a potential customer to kind of hook onto than for you saying that you're doing evolution. And it sounds like you've connected your business model with the way campuses, private or public, are actually getting security guards right now, right? Where they know they have an annual budget for number of bodies, a certain amount of presence.
Yeah, or to put it maybe in that parlance would be, our machines go out at an effective price of $3 to $9 an hour, where a guard would typically be $15 to $35 an hour, or an armed off-duty law enforcement officer, could be in the range of about $85 an hour. So that does provide some level of comfort and understanding of how things operate. But again, these are not always necessarily a one-for-one replacement. The country doesn't have enough guards and officers to even be doing the job that they're doing today. So in a lot of cases, we're helping redeploy resources where humans are a lot more effective, and where the monotonous computational heavy stuff the machines can do.
I'm really excited to share something a long time in the making with you. My first online course. Over the years, I've trained thousands of founders through my book, Accelerated Startup, and my infamous Pitching Like a Boss workshops and keynotes. Like I've done for thousands of founders, I will teach you how to pitch like a boss. And for the first time ever, I will be doing it in a cohort-based online course. This is the world's most comprehensive and intensive course for entrepreneurs and future founders on pitching. It will help you craft the perfect pitch for investors and customers. It will also help you master public speaking. Get funded, communicate your vision to grow your team, and dramatically improve sales of any product. Check out golomb.net/pitching, that's golomb.net/pitching for more information. See you there. Yeah, and there's a lot of parallels, for example, with trucking industry, right? And we'll talk about this in a second. But there's, for a number of years, there's a big panic. Truck driving or driving profession in the U.S. is the biggest profession in the country, and the panic was that autonomous vehicles are going to take away those jobs. When in reality, there's not enough truck drivers. So any kind of assistive technology that can make their life better and easier, is very helpful. And it sounds like very similar in this space as well.
No. The robots are coming to kill everybody and take everyone's job. Were you not paying attention? I mean, we need to get the media talking when you're going.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, a mix of science fiction, but then you start looking at technology, and there's last time I checked, there were no million robotaxis on the road yet. So you said you've already been out there for about 6 years in production, and the robots have been out there patrolling malls and campuses and office buildings. They must have seen some action. Tell us a few stories about kind of what have they, what kind of crimes have you been able to prevent? Some interesting things some anecdotes.
I'll start a different way, which is I'm fascinated that there are any crime fighting wins. I mean, if you go to Knightscope.com and just go to the crime page, you can see a long list of, things we've been able to accomplish. But, relatively speaking, 95, 99% of the time, a guard and officers, there's nothing going on. It's not what's like on TV, right? And then the statistical probability of us being there at the right time, at the right location, something goes wrong and we're able to help, you're nearing nil. It's near zero. But somehow we've helped the law enforcement agency issue an arrest warrant for a sexual predator. We helped another law enforcement agency apprehend an armed gunman. We help with a domestic violence case. A lot of workplace violence is, stuff at home creeping into the workplace. We stopped a fraudulent insurance claim, and the list continues. And I still find it fascinating that we have not just one but numerous opportunities, or wins, and we're just getting started. To be frank.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. I think, you probably prevented many more, probably an order of magnitude more that you don't know about because of the presence. But still, criminals are dumb. And you've been able to catch a few. It's like a dash cam for the world in 360.
Yep.
And that's a whole genre of videos on YouTube of people doing interesting things. So it's great. So let's shift gears a little bit about to kind of how you've built the company. You went through a number of rounds financing the company since its inception. You've done both conventional venture rounds, more or less, and then crowdfunding. So walk us through a little bit through that. I mean, you've done a lot of funding and financing through your career, through your companies, and you started M&A arguably at Ford. So you've gone through this journey in a kind of unconventional way. It's interesting to hear the decision point and how you got there.
Oh, it's super easy. You just download all the money from the cloud. It's super easy. I think one thing that founders I often try to get them to think about is a lot of folks are kind of programmed to focus on product market fit. Does your product match the market of what you're trying to go after? And they spend zero to very little time on capital to company fit. What is it that you're actually trying to do, and what capital do you actually really need, and where should that source be? And in a lot of cases, typical venture capital is not appropriate for almost every single company out there. It is a small portion. I'll put it in the positive. If a bunch of social media folks that built some fantastic companies all retired and started a fund, and they wanted to buy 20% of your company and steal 2 board seats, but you're working on a social media company, like, you should just do the deal. Like, there's no discussion to be had, just go. But in our case, name me the fund or the GP that's fluent in law enforcement, physical security, robotics, and hardware, and has a track record, and we should pay a premium for that capital. Like, kind of doesn't exist. So that's kind of the first point. Second, we have slightly outlandish mission, which is, let's see if we can make the US the safest country in the world. You are not going to do that with 4 institutional investors in an ivory tower under a rock somewhere. Like, that's not going to work. You're going to need to engage a mass portion of society to be involved and help the company grow. And so, we've got 28,000 investors, which, for some folks thinks, is kind of insanity. And, we're in the middle of a public listing, and we don't know of any company that's gone public with that many shareholders. So this is also uncharted territory. But, you ask who's on the cap table, it would be their judges, lawyers, politicians, NYPD retired detectives, FBI, CIA, DHS, vice presidents of malls, major leasing companies. I mean, there's all kinds of folks that have a financial motivation to change how we or reimagine public safety in the US. And that's kind of the right strategy for us. That may not be the right strategy for, a bunch of different companies. All I suggest is that folks have a think about it before you, embark on your venture.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And without getting too much into the weeds, but with that many investors on the cap table, you've had to probably do some pretty creative SPV structures, special purpose vehicle structures and things. So that's it's always fascinating, kind of engineering this whole process. Now, more on that same note, not many companies have been successful with equity crowdfunding, but it seemed to have worked well for Knighscope. Why do you think that is, and what tips can you give to other entrepreneurs if they're wanting to pursue that direction?
At first, I've got to, that term crowdfunding drives me crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, when Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, does an S1 IPO for an issuer, they're running around 2 weeks behind closed doors doing what? Crowdfunding. They're getting every Tom, Dick, and Harry to buy the shares. To have sometimes that term have a negative connotation, it just drives me crazy. I think first and foremost, I tell founders, regardless, which path you take to finance something, is you got to believe in what you're doing down to the bone. That you will do the irrational, illogical, and sometimes stupid things to force a transaction or something to happen. And if you don't have that in you, how are you going to convince the media, the analysts, your bankers, your board, your recruits, your clients, your suppliers to work with you? I think people are now realizing that, my management team and I are serious about what we're doing. We're willing to do whatever it takes, and we will force the outcome to happen of what this country needs. So when people start, said differently, if you were to ask me 8 years ago when we started, would the entire nation be interested and focused on reimagining public safety? I would say, no, when's that going to happen? But, kind of here we are at the, intersection of numerous important technologies and at the intersection of a really important recurring societal problem. So I think the story's important. I think there's a fascination around the technology. It's like, oh, wow, the thing that was on my Hollywood movie screen is now sitting literally in front of me. And honestly, I think people are sick and tired of the ongoing violence and stupidity that happens across our nation. Half jest and half in serious. Like, people worry about the robots. Honestly, from where I sit, I worry about the humans. Every few seconds there's a murder. Every few seconds there's a property crime. There's no robot involved. This is literally human activity all day long. And what I try to have investors understand is the quote unquote the market for crime is never going to collapse. The market's down today, right? And I'm sure it'll be up and then it'll be down. It'll be up and it'll be down. But 7 billion people are not going to wake up tomorrow morning and all start, acting appropriately and not causing, issues. So I think if you've got a recurring revenue business model for a recurring societal problem, you're probably onto something.
No, that's fantastic, right? If you want to be a billionaire, you just have to get $1 from a billion people. And that's one way to think about it. And I think you have some good parallels. As far as crime statistics and technology, if you look at the CCTV systems in cities like London, and you can see a big drop. They've obviously invested a lot of money into those systems because they work, and you're doing kind of a roaming version.
That's an important point. In the U.S., I think there's about 70 million cameras. Crime still has a $2 trillion negative economic impact, right? Annually. Our country's 85% rural and suburban. You're not going to pipe, power, and monitor a camera every 500 feet. It's not going to work, nor does it actually deter criminal behavior. So a different solution needs to be put forth.
When companies start to catch fire in blitzscale and look for capital to fuel that growth, or look to find the right exit strategy, they often seek the counsel of investment bankers. At Drakestar Partners, we work with some of the leading companies in global tech on capital raises, M&A, corporate carve-outs, SPACs, and much more. And we're pretty good at it. Our team of over 100 technology sector experts across 9 offices in 6 countries is comprised of not only career bankers, but experienced executive venture investors and technologists. Drakestar Partners is the #1 ranked and fastest growing mid-market investment bank across the US and Europe. While I focus on mobility and energy transition sector, along with all things Silicon Valley, my partners from the Pacific to the Atlantic and around the world lead in software, media, communications, and everything in between. Learn more about us at drakestar.com. So switching gears again a little bit, you built an autonomous security robot. It's an autonomous vehicle, any which way you think about it. What are your thoughts on autonomy and autonomous vehicles in general?
In general, I guess twofold. One, I'm fascinated and want everyone to get where they're going. I'm just not in agreement with the path to commercialize the technology. A lot of folks are doing the aerospace equivalent of, I'm going to go to Pluto first and I don't want to stop at the Mars or moon or the moon, where they're working on the most difficult problem first. And that's going to cause a lot of difficulties because that's not how you typically engineer something. We're the crawl, walk, run people. Hey, prove to me that this can work and has a viable proposition at less than 3 miles an hour. And then once we've got that kind of working, then we can work our way up to 10 and 25 and 35, et cetera. And I think that's a much more rational, sane way to commercialize a very difficult set of technologies. For those more technically oriented or listening in, engineers are really good at solving problems with constrained boundary conditions. Like what's going on in the autonomous space is literally the opposite. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Engineer, I need you to put that 4,000-pound unmanned vehicle on a public road. No safety regulations, no insurance framework, no legal framework, random time of day, random climate, random everything. But I need you to make sure it works 100% of the time and never fails. Go. I mean, it's almost a stupid assignment, right? That said, there's been a lot of benefits from that really hard assignment where you got a lot of progress on sensors, you got a lot of progress on compute capability, on models and everything else. But it's just a lot of, I don't want to say wasteful, but inefficient sources of capital. And at some point in time here, soon, I think, there'll be a self-driving autonomous winter. And people start realizing, the financiers will start realizing that there is not an exit here. And that there is only cash burn and there's no revenue. I mean, the 200 plus companies working on autonomous anything, I think the collective revenue is close to zero. So you dump almost $100 billion into a sector and nothing comes out. Maybe it's hard, So I have a different view. Others certainly disagree with what I just said, but we have our path, and that's kind of where we're focused.
No, that's a great way to put it. I've asked a number of people who are kind of in the trenches developing different types of autonomous technologies. And in every case, they of course think that their approach and that they're the ones that are going to get there, but it's always 2 years away. And I think you have the most logical approach as far as kind of incrementally getting there.
What scares me is, we're always recruiting awesome talent. And when you do 4 interviews in a row with engineers that are at some of those firms, and question is why you're leaving, is like, I don't have confidence in what's going on here because they want to ship in, next year or the year after. We're nowhere near ready to ship, and I don't want to put my name on this. And that to me is scary, right? You don't want that kind of nonsense going on either.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. And then there's a lot of, kind of public excitement about autonomy in the public sphere, but when you start looking under the hood, pun intended, we're a long ways away, it seems, and I think you agree. So by the time this comes out, this episode comes out, you will have completed your Reg A listing. Talk a little bit about why it's important for you to, for Knightscope to be a public company, and how what kind of different reaction do you get from your clients, your customers, who oftentimes are, municipalities?
I think there's a couple of different answers. One is just the practicalities, the blocking and tackling. Basically, the manner in which we raise the capital, we report to the US SEC every 6 months as if we're publicly traded. Or as I like to say, said differently, we have all the negative consequences of being publicly traded with no benefits. And so I kind of get the company out of, I call purgatory. So that's the first thing. I think second, access to the wider capital markets, always important, a lot more efficient capital. A lot of people in Startupville don't realize that, financing of startups is like a really tiny sliver of the global kind of economy. And yeah, some incoming clients would certainly prefer to work with a publicly traded company with appropriate governance and audits and cash and the like. But it's also helpful for recruiting. It helps build the brand. And I bought a lot of companies in my life, so has my CFO. If the market cap's right and the timing's right, I mean, there's opportunities for us to be a bit acquisitive or a lot acquisitive. We're here in Silicon Valley, I forgot the latest count, but 20,000 startups and 95% of them fail every year. There's a lot of interesting stuff that could be picked up as well.
Now, can we expect an IPO or a SPAC transaction in the near future?
So we're actually in the SPAC size spent a good 6 months on. At the time, the sizing was a problem, but also at the time and still now, if the SEC is investigating, it's probably not a good place for us to want to be there. I have a huge problem with putting out projections in 2024, 25, 26 to justify some BS valuations so the bankers can get paid. I'm going to get in trouble for just saying that, but
I resemble that comment.
I'm not interested. Oh, let me put a pipe on top to validate the transaction. Okay, whatever. So we're in the process we announced on December 1st of last year that we're in the process of listing on NASDAQ. The manner which we're taking the company public, the regulatory mechanism is through a regulation A+, but the end result is a unique public listing. So if everything goes well, we should be trading under ticker symbol KSCP.
Yeah, and good luck with that. And by the time this comes out, people will be able to look you up and become an investor. So hopefully, now talk a little bit about what we can expect. I know you don't want to talk about numbers into the next few years, but tell us a little bit about some exciting products and things we can expect from Knightscope in the next few years.
I think it's on two axes. As I like to say, criminals and terrorists don't care that you secure schools or hospitals or casinos or commercial real estate. Like, if you're serious about the problem, you kind of need to be everywhere. And so I think over the next decade or two, you should see a portfolio of products of variety of form factors and sizes to cover every nook and cranny of inside and outdoors. So a very wide portfolio. And then I think it should be very deep in terms of detection capability. So being able to have the machines do 100 times more than a human could ever do, and be able to literally see, feel, hear, and smell. And if you can get that portfolio of products to do that, I mean, let's say we put 1 million machines in network to help the 2 million officers and guards, and the FBI, publishes their most wanted list. Like, likelihood we catch the 10 people on that list goes a lot higher real quick, right? If the 2 million officers and guards actually have tools for them to do their jobs more effectively and cover a lot more ground. So I think that's kind of where I'm focused on expanding the portfolio and then expanding the depth of capabilities.
Yeah, very interesting. And now, where do you see robotics in 10 years? And, we talked about it a little bit, but, how do you think the job market's going to change? So, here we are in the beginning of 22. What are we looking at, at the end of the decade or in 32, as far as your products or kind of general approach to these helper devices, these autonomous vehicles, indoors and outdoors?
So a couple comments. First, we're not a robotics company, just to be super clear. We're an advanced physical security company. Our mission is to secure the U.S. I frankly, quote unquote, don't care what technology we work on. We just need to fix the damn problem. Robotics, honestly, we're kind of in the 1970s. I've been saying the same thing for a decade now. We're in the 1970s equivalent of the PC industry. It's just kind of leaving the hobbyist category. We've got maybe a handful of companies maybe making a little bit of progress, but it's still very early days. And if you ever want to figure out what's going to happen, just follow the cash. It's not that hard. Why does Google exist or eBay or PayPal or Facebook? It's because, dozens of attempts were made, billions of dollars spent. I think Google was at 13th search engine. It's because that risk capital was put forth. I forgot the numbers, but the latest that's in my head is, $130 billion goes into startups every year. Like 80, if I remember right, 80% into software, 10% into biotech, and 10% into other. If you told me that $50 billion was going into robotics every year, I was okay, this is going to be super interesting in 10 years. But sorry to be the downer, but there's not enough risk capital and there are not enough roboticists in the world to come anywhere near what the media, society, or Hollywood thinks is going to happen. And I think therein also lies the opportunity, right? For those that can gather the talent and the capital to make some progress. But I think there's a lot of ingredients missing.
Yeah, that's incredibly insightful. I think the amount of risk capital that goes in and kind of the innovation cluster that's required to actually get there. rather than just talking about it and one time, expecting somebody to be a genius to have a breakthrough that will leap forward by a decade. That's not an expectation that usually happens. If you study the history of every wave, it's always exactly what you described: a lot of capital going in, a lot of trial and error, component technologies, and finally getting there with something that people get excited about. Well, I want to thank you for all that. That was really interesting. I like to wrap up with a question, for folks who've been around the block a few times, and knowing what you know now, what advice would you have given your young self starting your career at Ford?
There's so many. Off the top of my head, in no particular order, LinkedIn's your friend. I know a lot of people like to make fun of it or whatever, but in my eyes, what moves the world around is people, cash, and relationships. And having, a strong network of folks that you can call on to help, or you can be helpful, can be very, very important over the long term. I think, in my eyes, you pick something you love, do what you love. Life is short. You need to make a big impact. So don't waste your time on silly photo sharing stuff or, stupid video games or whatever. Focus on something that can be meaningful to society and can help with a little bit of legacy that you left this place a lot better than when you arrived. As much as I hate it, I've now done more financial engineering than actual engineering, which I'm not proud of. I think having the willingness to go spend the time to unstuck something because it's in your way, it's got to be part of a founder's DNA. It's like, I don't care what problem, COVID's messing up supply chain. Okay, I guess that's a problem. We need to go fix that. Financing, this is a problem. Great. Okay, now we need to go fix that. And you got to be willing to dig in and dig in deep to fix the problem. Because no one else is going to do that for you.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. Applaud your life's work here for the last almost decade of solving the crime problem, or at least helping make this country and probably other countries a little bit down the road safer. And I think everybody now will be paying more attention, and when they go out and they see one of the Knightscope robots, they'll have a better picture. So thank you very much for being on the show. Good luck with the Reggae listing, and we'll be watching Knighscope with a lot of interest.
Thanks for having us, and don't forget, everyone, long Knightscope and short the criminals.
That was my conversation with William Santana Li, Chairman and CEO of Knighscope. If you'd like to connect with me to discuss mobility and sustainability, you can find me online at golomb.net. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. We'll see you in the next episode.